Welcome to the Smart Nonsense Podcast, where we talk about entrepreneurship, self-development, and challenging norms. Today, it's episode 52, and we are talking with a fellow podcaster deep in the startup world. He's the host of the Forward Thinking Founders podcast, where he explores all these different hidden nuggets, these hidden gem founders within Silicon Valley. He's looking for those beginning stage companies that are about to blow up. A few notable guests, he's had Eric Reese of the Lean Startup, Austin Allred of the Lambda School, and even our friend Valentin Perez of Learn Monthly. The guest we're hinting at is Mat Sherman, and we talk about his wild startup experiences, the truth about Silicon Valley, and some of the lessons that he's learned after speaking with over 300 startup founders and over 100 venture capitalists. If you want to connect with Matt on Twitter, he is there. It's at @MAT_Sherman. You can also see his website, which is a crazy idea. We'll get into that, but it's called forwardthinking.city. And it's basically Silicon Valley, but online. And you can also find his email list, forwardthinking.substack.com. I'm excited for you to listen to the podcast. Let's get into it. This is episode 52 with Mat Sherman. We're here. This is Smart Nonsense, and we're talking to Mat Sherman, as we said in the intro. And Matt, there's a lot we want to cover. Like, we want to get into just everything entrepreneurship with your whole background there, because it's fascinating how you evolved into now doing podcasts. Congrats on 300 episodes. It's been a wild ride just seeing what you've done. What's that feel like first? Like, you just crossed the 300 threshold. What is that like?
I would say the initial thought is I like that it wasn't just something I did and then stopped doing. Like, it's a project that I have seen through and has not just stayed a project, but evolved into something. And that I'm proud of that, because I'm one, just like a lot of entrepreneurs, to like start a lot of things and like change ideas in like a month. And the podcast was not that. The podcast is like a thing, and it's pretty much here to stay, which is exciting to me.
Matt, I wonder, because okay, I'm 23 years old. I've thought I was an entrepreneur my entire life. And I was listening to How I Built This podcast, and I figured about 2 to 4 weeks ago that I might just be an inventor, not an entrepreneur. Like you said, is like, I love the creation. I love the 0 to 1-ness of things. But as soon as it becomes kind of the long haul, 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, I'm like, I want to invent something. So maybe you too aren't as much of an entrepreneur as you think, or
more so.
I think that it's like it's this evolution. It's the stage. Like, I mean, I definitely am a idea person and an inventor. But I think if you stay an inventor forever, that's good if that's what you want to be. But no, I want to create a lot of value, like doing something that I am super interested in. And my first company, which we can talk about, was like it was creating a lot of value, but like, I wasn't like that super into it. To be totally honest, like, it was content marketing as a service. I just, I'm just like, like, this is good, cool, but not loving it. So now that I've kind of figured out a way to, now my full-time gig is what I'm doing now, which is forward thinking, and all that encapsulates it. I definitely feel like I've gone from inventor to entrepreneur, and that's kind of like the test, right? Can you actually build something that creates value versus just start something that's cool? That sounds cool, but like, there maybe doesn't create that much value yet.
Yeah, it's we were lucky enough. It's nice when you have the little recap episodes. I think at 100 or 200, you had a friend come on and interview you. So we got to hear a lot about your story, but there's so many aspects we want to dig into. But if we rewind, going back to, say, Matt in college and a little bit younger than before all of this, was that when you got into entrepreneurship, or where did this bug come from that you really like this world?
So there's this like hidden, it's not hidden, I'm not secret about it, but I don't talk about it, where I actually, before, I would say startup land, before I became a startup person, I was actually a singer-songwriter. And from 8th grade to sophomore year of college, I put out hundreds of songs on YouTube. I put out like an album on Spotify, like toured. I didn't tour, but like I toured locally. I had t-shirts and stickers and stuff. And this was kind of my first entrepreneurial endeavor. It wasn't a startup, but I hustled to sell tickets. I created a product. I created an online presence. I built up, I mean, it's not big at all, but I built up some capacity of a YouTube channel. And I didn't really consider myself an entrepreneur at this point. I just loved music. I loved like sharing what I was doing. And it was only until I kind of entered startup land that I realized that like, oh shit, like I've actually been an entrepreneurial type for quite a while. I just didn't apply that to business building. It was like creating and songwriting. So that's kind of where this all started. And I would say I was a singer songwriter for longer than I've been a startup person. I was a singer songwriter for 8 years, and I've only been in startups for like 5. So it's kind of like interesting because obviously this is my life right now, but it's not even the thing I've done longest. Like I was a music person for way longer, which I think is like kind of interesting to think about. That's where it started.
What because Dylan and I we graduated college last year, and what's so interesting for us is, at least me, is, well, it happened to both of us, but you go to college for one thing and you come out, at least a lot of our friends, me and Dylan probably included, come out doing something completely different. So I'm curious, did the kind of course of your life, it sounds like maybe you were more music oriented going into college and you came out as an entrepreneur type. What were you studying at the time? And so what happened to music, basically?
What happened to music is that I suck. I'm like,
but you couldn't.
I'm fine. You know, I'm a really good guitarist. I actually like. I'm still like extremely talented at guitar, but I don't have a great voice, and I have a fine voice. It's fine, but if you're gonna make it in music, you need to be truly great. And I realized my sophomore year of college that I just like wasn't good enough to be at a kind of perform at a supreme level. So that was my sophomore year. So my junior year, I had a video phase where I was making videos for sororities and this and whatever, and that, I had a YouTube channel, M Sherman TV. And I was kind of like, I was like exploring this new thing. And then I remember the last day of school, my junior year, I got a startup idea. And this is like, I had no interest in startups. I didn't know who Paul Graham was, didn't know why, didn't know anything. And I just got an idea. Like I think it was May 1st. I think I'll have to like figure it out because this was a huge moment in my life. But I got a startup idea. I'm like, let's try this.
I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I kind of went through the cycles, and everyone goes through when you first get in. You go through cycles, and if you stay in long enough, you then you then kind of figure it out. And that's kind of my theme. Like I was not a smart entrepreneur, but I just stopped. I didn't leave the scene. I kept going, and it's kind of I'm in a position where I'm like, you know, it's compounded enough where I'm like actually doing cool things and I can make money from it, and that's great. But yeah, it all started with a startup idea.
What was that idea? Sorry,
the idea. No, it's fine. It was the worst idea you ever could fathom in the history of the world. So I was running. I was on a jog. I got the idea on a jog. I remember this pretty vividly. I remember where I was. I was jogging. I was using the app Zombies Run, which is like a running app where zombies like chase you, and you need to run past. It's like kind of fun. But then I was like, like this is kind of cool. What if like the zombies were actually other people on the street?
Huh? That's not that crazy.
Well, I can tell you why it is. So I've learned a lot about startups, and I can now tell you why it never would have worked. But then I'm like, let's do it. So it was called it was just like a thing where it's like you run, and if someone else is on the app, they can like chase you, and you run from them. But then if you're the zombie,
it's like, was that Pokemon Go, but like chasing each other or something.
Stalker-ish, but like it gives you
purge
to chase people. Like
yeah.
And then I remember the first. God bless his soul. It was Mike Alonso. I'm like, hey, I want to build this. Like, can you? Again, I know nothing about anything startups. I'm like, oh, I want to build this. Like, can you develop it for me? How much will this cost? And he's like, Matt, this might be a little too expensive for you, but also I would encourage you to potentially simplify your idea. Because I'm this guy that's just like, I know nothing. Again, I know nothing. I'm like, oh, this sounds cool. And he's like, maybe simplify slightly. And that was the first startup lesson I ever learned. It's like, you can start simple, and simple is usually good. And that is the first of thousands of lessons I've learned on the path, and I'm 26, right? I'm just getting started, which I think is the fun part.
Right. By 30, you'll have a 500-page book on everything, just because you'll probably have 1,000 podcast episodes by then.
Yeah.
What with the entrepreneurial world, like you get into it and you get obsessed. And what's interesting to me is how obsessed you were or still are with Y Combinator, Paul Graham. Like, where did all this come from?
Well, this is interesting because so Phoenix has a startup scene, just like any city has a startup scene. And I, at this moment, didn't understand how strong SF was. I didn't understand. I had to learn things. But the first content, I don't know how I came across this. Maybe it was skill, maybe it was luck. But when I decided I want to start a startup, very soon after, I came across the How to Start a Startup course by Y Combinator from Stanford in 2014. And this is taught by Sam Altman and many other people. And this was one of the first pieces of content I ever consumed was out of the best, right? YC. And that was the seed in my brain that did two things for me. One, it taught me like how to actually do a startup, not like this, like not Phoenix style, not Milwaukee style, but like San Francisco style startup, which caused for some controversy later in Phoenix. But it also they almost taught me in some ways everything that I not everything that I know, but they gave me the seed of like what I need to know about startups, and I'm forever loyal to Y Combinator for that. Like, I mean, I'm now past the point where I think I want to apply, but like Y Combinator was this program that taught me the basics of startups. And honestly, if it weren't for them, I probably would have learned from local people in Phoenix, and I would have had quite a different perspective on things. And I'm grateful that that I found YC.
What is so different about the Phoenix startup scene? I know San Francisco is San Francisco and Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. What would have been so different if you just kind of jumped in Phoenix? Because I know nothing about.
Well, I
Phoenix.
did. So that's the thing. So I jumped in deep. So there's this community called Yes PHX that was started by a dear friend, Jonathan Cottrell. And this is like, the startup community, this in air quotes, the startup community of Phoenix. And it was started by a ton of founders like Jonathan, like Mary Martinez, like a ton of people that I respect. And if there was a community like them, I want to be a part of it. But what happened is the community grew very quickly, and you got a lot of, as Brad Feld would put, feeders that joined. So not founders, but like a lot of community, enthusiasts, investors, press, etc. And there weren't really that many founders. And I'm here being like, yo, like if you want to build a startup community, like if you need founders, and it wasn't really attracting these types of people. And I've kind of thought this. I mean, I'm past this. Like Phoenix and I had in some capacity, like a falling out. I was potentially a little too aggressive for the scene, which I respect and understand. I think everyone's kind of past it now. But there was a point where I was really trying to change things to make it better, to be more like San Francisco. And I finally realized that nothing's like San Francisco. There's nothing wrong with Phoenix. There's not it's a small business. You can build companies there. You can build some startups there, but you can't build San Francisco and Phoenix. You just can't. And that's when I got into the launch accelerator. That was Jason Calacanis' accelerator. I'm skipping it a little bit, but
is that at MIT?
No, that's in San Francisco.
That's Launchpad. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, no worries. I then finally, I am jumping up for a bit so we can go back, but I finally got what I wanted, which is access to San Francisco networks plus my podcast. And then I finally was at peace in Phoenix because I knew that if there was something else out there, which there was, I had access to it. Versus in Phoenix, the scene was not great for someone like me, and I knew there was something better out there, and I didn't know how to find it. So I guess to sum it all up, Phoenix is extremely great for small business. I am pretty avid. If you're trying to build a venture-backed company, don't do it in Phoenix. And if you do it in Phoenix, get investors in the Bay. So, I mean, building in Phoenix is fine, but I've written this is people might be listening to this, maybe oh, he's back to his old ways. No, this is how I'm always going to feel. This is just how it is. And we can dive into it, but if you want, but it's just not where you start a startup. It's not. And if it is, it's not where you'll succeed as big as you could somewhere else.
I don't want to fast forward too much, but it is tied with the forward thinking city
I was just going to say that must be
And
how you got to forward thinking city.
Is that where you're like, I wish I had this, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever?
Well, yes. So yes to what you just said, but many things happened in between, like this Phoenix stuff and then the culmination of Forward Thinking City. And kind of like in short, there was Phoenix. Then I started my podcast. Then we got into the Launch Accelerator, and then Twitter. I'm kind of big on Twitter now,
Right.
and all these things kind of led me to get to kind of like to the inside networks of San Francisco. And I kind of got there. I'm like, wow, like this kind of sucks. Like, this it's obviously super powerful and there's lots of money, but there's this implicit rule that happen in San Francisco. And I didn't like that either. So here I am, Phoenix. I don't like how Phoenix operates for startups. And I don't even like how San Francisco operates. Like, I know that's how it works, but like there are things about it which we can definitely go into that I don't like.
Yeah.
And I'm like, shit, like, if there's not a place that I like, if there's not a city that is great that I want to be a part of, like, I'm just gonna make my own. And that's exactly what I did and what I'm doing.
That's super cool. And we'll get there. I quickly want to piggyback on Twitter, and then let's go back to your first startup. But here's what's so crazy, Matt, is I'm new to Twitter. Dylan's new to Twitter literally within the last week because somebody came on here and said, if you're not on Twitter, you're missing it. You're missing out. Dylan either likes something or retweets something that either you said or someone you follow. I see you're asking for people to come on and talk. And then I was like, here, let me come on and talk to you about my company that doesn't exist yet. Obviously, you don't want to do that. But just the fact that a week ago, I didn't know who Mat Sherman was. I was hardly even on Twitter. Now here you are, and I've dived so far into forward-thinking founders and who you are, and it's just it's mind-blowing. When did you realize Twitter is such a powerful tool, and how are you using it?
So unlike the starting the startup moment, I actually don't. There's not a moment, like one moment where I'm like, oh, like Twitter is big. Like, I've been on Twitter for like 3 years. No, 2015. I've been on Twitter for 5 years. But it was only like in the last two, mainly in the last one, that I really, was active. It was probably after actually Pavlov died. Because after Pavlov died, I was less stressed. I joined a rocket ship in Prenda, and I was just able to tweet, right? So I think I just started tweeting more. And then something happened like 3 months ago where I got some 3 or 4 really viral tweets in a row. I went from like 1,500 followers to 3,000 in like very short amount of time. I'm like, okay, like sweet. And then most of like the city residents come from Twitter. So like, how do I use Twitter? I don't use it super methodologically. Like, I tweet what I want to tweet. I do tweet some businessy stuff. But I'm me. Like, I think I don't have a, I mean, my brand is me, right? I feel like if someone's listening to this, it kind of feels similar to what I put out on Twitter. I don't use it as a marketing. It is a marketing channel, but I don't use it as one. I just tweet what I want to tweet, and that works. People like the authenticity and stuff.
Dylan, I forget. I think, was it in the Isaac Morehouse? Dylan sent me, or is it Moore? The interview you did with him, Matt. But I think it was him, just basically saying like everything he does is on Twitter. It might not have been him, but in terms of networking and finding VCs and just the whole gamut.
That's the thing. There are so many podcasts that we're listening to. You get lost in. I don't know how you keep track, Matt, but you've had so many amazing people on, and we'll get into
someone we know very closely, by the way.
Right. True. If we go more chronologically back in time again, if we're say going to Pavlov and Jason Calacanis, what's well, one, just to sum up, it's basically you have all these writers out there and you were connecting them with early companies, startups that needed blog posts. Is that a decent summary of what happened?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So you get funding, and you were pretty much piggybacking, or like not piggybacking, but putting the team on your back with growing it to, was it 25,000 a month, or like pretty?
Yeah, our peak MRR was like 25K and like about 25K in MRR. Note that not under me. We'll get into this maybe, but like that sounds impressive. Like, oh, 25K MRR, like your kid, but like you don't like. I had no capacity to understand like the cogs that came with that. Like, it sounds good, but like, woo, that was expensive.
So
revenue.
For anyone listening, this is monthly revenue and then cost of goods sold,
recurring revenue.
Yeah.
And
ahead.
yeah, it's funny because just hearing you, like, the whole money side or the finance side was never your specialty. But you know, we learn slowly as we go. It was actually funny too, listening to you say, like, you kind of, you specialized in this one area, but you pushed off, like, maturing. I forget the exact quote that you had, but basically, like, now you're focusing on some other aspects of the life, but right then you were just so deep in the world of just starting that and getting off the ground. And
Well,
yeah.
this is a product of Y Combinator. So Y Combinator said, "Oh, if you're like, got to grow every week, got to grow every month, or else like you're toast." And that's not what they say. They don't say that, but that's what I, as a young 22-year-old, a 23-year-old founder, I'm like, oh, I got to grow every month. So when I started Public, and we don't have to go into the deep history of Public because it's actually like there's multiple versions of it, that even pre Jeremy, but like the V1 of Public, we grew every single month for like 8 months or 9 months, except for 1 month. And that 1 month, I literally almost fainted on the first of the month, being like, "Oh my god, we didn't grow like another." Like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But at that moment, I was under the spell of YC, and again, this is not a knock on YC. This is a knock on my maturity as a founder. I mean, and it's been interesting, honestly. I'm an Arizona State communications grad. I don't even think I'm like the smartest person. I'm not even that smart. I'm just like tumbling through this, but as I tumble, I do get smarter, right? And I am becoming a better founder. And it's just interesting to observe, almost if I went out of my body and just watched myself, what I'm doing. It's like pretty intriguing. Like I've been just like my own journey myself.
Henry and I were talking earlier about, maybe it was the Morehouse episode too, I'm not sure, but somewhere regarding, like, someone that, say, goes to an Ivy League school and gets a degree there in, say, it's communications or something like that. They would much rather hire a kid that has 60,000 followers on YouTube that never went to college or something like that for marketing, because they actually know what it's like to build an audience. And that's so valuable. And that's why it's incredible. Like, you don't need the accolades or the degree or anything anymore. But was it intimidating for you? Because usually, like, you hear just Stanford, all these elite schools. Was that at all in your mind?
So no, I'm a pretty stubborn, in a good way, good and bad way, founder. So I thought we were the bee's knees. I was pretty confident. Like when it was just me pitching Jason because we had to fly up there. I remember he said like, "Oh, I believe it." And I'm just like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "Yeah, I got this." And then I remember driving up to San Francisco with Jeremy. We're writing songs about how we're going to raise a seed. We were just like, "We got this." Right. And I talked about this on that podcast, but I think when I like kind of, I don't know. I think when the reality kind of hit me, I will say actually the reality hit me when we lost our giant customer. And then during the accelerator, and we got smacked around for that was not fun. We should have probably stopped the accelerator then, because we really were off the rails because of what, like, and I as a former CEO of that company, it's not founder, right? It wasn't a CEO, it was like 4 people on the team. As the founder of that company, co-founder of that company, I should have done the job of like, great, we just lost a third of our revenue. How are we going to get it back? Where are we going to cut costs? Where this, but like I didn't. And it's not because I didn't want to. I just didn't know that's what I was supposed to do. Like I just wasn't there yet. I wasn't there as a founder.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, but instead of doing those things you just mentioned, you like drove over to Sand Hill Road, right, to try and raise more money. Or
so we're talking the beginning of the downfall, then the end of the downfall. So the beginning, so the beginning of it, when we lost this customer, that was a third of our MRR. This was during the accelerator, and I just didn't do what I was supposed to do. At the same time, I think I actually did, because I didn't want to like Public. It's kind of a separate convo, but we can talk about it here. But like, I didn't want to raise $1 million or $5 million or $20 million for Public. Was not this thing that I wanted to be venture scale. So maybe it was me subconsciously sabotaging myself because I didn't know what else to do. And that's not a conscious act, but I do think there is a small element of that there. But then when you're talking about driving to Sand Hill, you're talking about so a year later, 9 months later, we were out of money, no more salary, nothing. Like, it has been a hell of a year. So we got the 100K, like we are now out of the 100K and revenue. And I'm like, screw it. Like, this isn't time to be a great founder. This is not what great founders do, in my opinion. I'm like, let's drive up to Sand Hill Road and just see if I can pitch some of VCs. Like, no plan, nothing. And I get up there and I'm like, what the hell am I doing up here? And because I'm already burning so much money just being up there. So then I drove up there. I think literally the next day I drove back home. I'm like, getting a job.
This is, I think, the disillusion on the West Coast. And I've spent my fair share of time there. I know the founder of Basecamp was talking about it in a podcast. What's his name? Jason Fried.
Yeah.
Basically, he was saying like tech companies that are born out of Palo Alto and Silicon Valley never really learn like the importance of being profitable, because there's no need to, because you can drive to Sand Hill Road and have people write you checks. You know, like, well, Facebook is pretty profitable, but the likes of companies that size, they just keep getting VC funded and VC funded and VC funded. So they never learn like how to be profitable with one customer. Obviously you were young at the time. I mean, you were about our age, but it's interesting now to see you 4 or 5 years removed saying, well, you're able to shed some light on kind of how backwards some of that stuff is.
Well, this is the impetus and the thesis and the everything for the city, for the forward thinking city. And note, just to level set dates. So to give you a little bit of a timeline. So first startup idea ever, 2015. Publoft started in 2017. We got
is
the
that Pub PUB?
Yeah.
Loft. Okay.
Yeah. And then note for people that are, for either you or people that are listening, Publoft and Gigloft, all the same thing. We can that's like those are the same company pretty much. And we got the investment from Jason in 2019, and then at the end of 2019, I got my job at Prenda, and now only a month ago, which is today for the date, is September 3rd, I quit that job to start forward thinking. So this is all this is all pretty compact actually into like 3 years, which has been interesting for me.
And I think it's really interesting that when you got that job and on that kind of, I think it was a recap of 2019 episode, you were saying like you were just so happy to have a paycheck come in bi-weekly here every month, and you were so done suffering for 3 years, because that's what it was. But here you go again. You're headed back into the world.
It's true. So as founders, you have, just like anything, you have ebbs and flows, and like sometimes you need things, sometimes you need them less. And I needed Prenda. Prenda was incredible experience. I mean, it is very rare where you get to spend 8 months at a future potential, like probably like $10 billion company. Like Prenda is, like, based on what I know, which I can't share, but like Prenda is going to be a very, very big company. Like I guarantee it. And I laid some of the pipes there, like, which is kind of fun. Additionally, no one on Prenda knew I was going to be there for very long. No one, even the CEO, he's like, I know you're not going to be there very long. I knew I wasn't going to be there very long. So I used Prenda for what, for the stability. In return, I gave them a lot, like all my value. And like, there was a very fair fit. It was a very fair, like, partnership there. I mean, I worked there. Like, I was an employee, but I'm now to a point where I've saved up some money, gotten some revenue from forward thinking, and I think, more mature as a founder to then try again. And suffering, you only suffer if you allow yourself to suffer. And Publoft, I loved the hustle porn. I'm like, oh, I work so hard. I'm working so hard. I struggled so much. Whereas with forward thinking, look, like, if I'm not able to get revenue, great, I'll take a gig. If I'm really not able to get revenue, great, I'll take a job. Like, I'm not this, like, I'm way more of a mature and better founder today than I was in 2017. And simply because of that is the reason why I left in a much, like, it was almost an easy-ish decision. It wasn't easy, but like, once the decision was made, I'm like, great, here we go. Because I trust myself to be smarter than I was 3 years. I'm not going to go into debt this time. I'm not going to try to raise, like, there were VCs that were like, I'd love to meet and give you some capital. And I'm like, no, like, I want to do this bootstrapped. So things are just different this time. Things are just, they're a little different.
That's what I'm curious about, because I've always just been scared. I've been intimidated by the idea of pitching VCs, and you did over 100. And so I can't imagine what that's even like. why now are you bootstrapping? To not have that outside pressure pushing you in a different direction, or what's the main reason for that?
Well, so that for sure. Like I don't want the outside pressure. I don't want the pressure to exit or anything like that. But the second thing is like I really have from the accelerator and also from being in tech Twitter, I like really subscribe to Jason Fried's view on San Francisco. And there's people that like the fact that I just like I think we will raise maybe at some point some sort of capital, but like I guess I just don't need to. Like we're gonna become profitable, soon. Like we're growing revenue fairly quickly, and even if like we're not able to, I do have some angel friends that might be willing to write some checks. But it's like even if not, I just it makes me ponder when you have someone out of YC, with an idea they can raise on, not an idea, but like they get like people that just like raise so much money with so little traction. And here I am being like, I can probably get to similar types of traction without any capital. And for me, I think the last thing I'll say is because I've always been a growth person. I want to build a city, right, that competes with San Francisco. Like I want that. And this city is going to be based on both the combined mindset of Jason Fried and San Francisco. So, and I think I do balance the two well. So just to answer your question in 3 ways, I don't want the pressure right now. I don't need it. And I think I am way better of a founder than a lot of founders raising the seed. I can probably skip the seed round. Like I can probably get to revenue and raise an A round, less dilution. They'd be like, "Oh, but you couldn't have grown." Like, great, but I at least own my company. Like, God, it's just the whole system makes me like cringe slightly.
Yeah, it is. I love this pushback. I think it's always like we go over the line and there's a little bit of pushback towards this Jason Fried direction. We're also big Derek Sivers fans, so we've been reading a lot of that stuff. Just like we're playing the long game. Like if you're trying to build something that lasts, there's no need to rush into it this year. So I think hearing more messages like that, it's funny because you started on one side, the traditional side, and now kind of going towards bootstrapping side.
Well, do note that I am on the bootstrap side right now. Like I started this a month ago, and I think it would be irresponsible to my future self to raise capital right now. With that said, I don't think I'm like we will raise capital. I don't know if it will be equity. It might be debt. It might be I don't know. We'll see. But we will raise a capital. But I guess I ride the middle. I'm very much so like I understand both perspectives, and I ride the middle in that I see why someone want to raise a bunch of capital. I see why someone wouldn't, and I see like use cases for both.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this exists, but like I'm just like I want to be in the middle because I want the city to be the middle. I want the city to be. You can raise a lot of capital if it makes sense, but you also can bootstrap and build a giant company, and those both can exist, and those are both respected forms of entrepreneurship.
I'll mention this in the intro a little bit, give some details, but can we go into more depth about what exactly the city looks like now, what you envision it'll look like in a couple years?
Sure. So right now the city is event-based. I am very good with no code. I'm not a developer, but I am probably like I'm a very good no coder. So I'm able to build pretty much anything I want. And what I decided that this is going to be an event-based city. So there's no Slack, there's no circle that you join. You just pay $15 a month and you get access to a list of events. Some of these events are AMAs. Like we did an AMA with Austin Allred. Yesterday we did one with Chris Hurd. We're doing one with Seth from Found Your Group next week, that's a huge deal. So you get to AMAs, ask these people questions, etc. Another element of the city is pitch battles. Every month we have a pitch battle where you get to pitch, potential room awards, meet VCs. It's kind of a fun way. It's just like a fun thing to practice your pitch, potentially fundraise. And that we'll see where that goes over time. And then we have like social events, right? So you can go to our happy hours, our coffee hours, etc. And we're gonna have like different types of events as time goes on, of course. And that is kind of the short term where the city is. It's event based. It's like all based in Airtable with links to events, and you have to pay to get access to the links. So very basic.
And it will always live in the cloud, kind of forever? It's a virtual city, no?
It will always it will always live in the cloud. This will never be something that great. Like we're now going to be based in Phoenix or based here or based there. So yes, it will always live in the cloud. I would not be surprised if it starts in the cloud, then elements of it would become physical. I'm not thinking about this now. I don't know what this will look like, but I'm kind of building for me, because I want this. And I think it would be great if I could live in a San Francisco-esque city, type of city, but kind of with the culture I want, right? I think San Francisco is great in so many ways. Just in many ways, it's not. And like if I so I think physical, is on the table on top of always a virtual environment.
I don't even know if I've been to San Francisco. I know Henry lived there for a bit, but what downsides do you see? I think a lot of people see the upsides of just being in this.
Downsides. I once paid $35 for like 2 tacos. I swear, street tacos. I can't make that up. And a bottle of water. $35. You can't afford to live there. That's the downside. But Matt, what do you got?
Well, yeah, there's that. There's that whole element, cost of living. But I think the downside is, San Francisco has in the Bay Area has a great PR team. Kind of a joke, but the PR for raising capital is very strong. It doesn't hurt YC to get someone that goes in and loses, right? It doesn't hurt any VC. Just I have a lot of respect for how he handled 2019. He is a complete professional, although he has this persona that is suggestive, as a being in one of his investments, he is a professional. But the thing is, us going through the accelerator, losing his money, failing, he doesn't care because he has all his winners. And this is the thing that San Francisco forgets, that the winners are great, they create a lot of value, but there ain't that many of them. And for every winner, there are tons of people just like me that the business was doing fine. Again, this is 100% my fault for what went on, but the business was doing fine before we took money. And I think this is the case for thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of people that drink the Kool-Aid, go through the system, and get spit out and realize that they were sold something that wasn't as pretty. And it's all it's their fault as found. No, I'm not putting this on the Bay. This is founders' fault. It's on the founders to do their research. But it's at some point, what are you supposed to do when you got YC that's oh, you got something, you went to Stanford, call me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's I think the downside of San Francisco is that the narrative only works for a few, and for the people that it doesn't work for, at worst, you waste time and money, and then at the truly worst, it could potentially derail your life slightly. And I think that I'll leave it there.
Derail your life. Look at Elizabeth Holmes, of Theranos. I don't know if either of you are familiar, but she was swept up in this whole Steve Jobs, I'm going to build this $1 trillion blood test company. And first of all, like you said, she got spit out and she probably can't do anything ever again. But it's also so much of the Bay was instilled in her and her schooling and her research that, she kind of went off the deep end with it. That's an extreme example.
I'm sure that it's everywhere because that's basically the business model is I think Peter Thiel said this, where you're one company. If you're a venture capitalist, your top company is gonna outperform all the other companies in your portfolio. So it's an interesting environment.
And I think that if you're a founder, and you can't do this in the moment because good founders wouldn't, but you have to think are you going to be that one? Objectively, if they invest in 30 companies, are you really going to be that company? Or and what if you're not? And that's I already said everything, but it's just I don't know. I just this something. The last thing I'll say about it actually is so there's that element. Then the other element, and this is what I actually think is worse, is the status element of it, and the filters that people use to give to, and this is my whole experience. It took me so much to break into the network, but you could have someone that like you got someone executing on a great business in Iowa that could be venture scale, right? But just because they don't know the rules of the Bay Area, they're not welcome into the venture capital community. Whereas you got a random 18-year-old that went to Stanford, maybe their dad worked at, the great, here's $1 million. Let's see if your idea works. And I just think that like it's just unfortunate for San Francisco. They're missing out on a lot of opportunities, and they're missing out on a lot of potential higher returns of funds. But because they're actually not that risk adverse, contrary to popular belief. They're all right. One more thing, and then I'm gonna stop laying into them. They say like San Francisco has this narrative that they invest in outliers and outsiders. But you actually go in there and you actually like talk to some people, and it is not true. And I would have cut. I don't know if I'm able to curse on this, and I would have cursed if I didn't.
Whatever you want.
It's just not. They thrive on pattern recognition. They thrive on filters, and you can't even blame them because the way the whole thing works, the LPs need the returns, so the VCs need the returns, so they invest in safe bets. But the whole narrative is the opposite of that. Like, we'll invest in nobody's. Well, and I'm just like, the whole thing just is icky,
And we've talked about that. It's been that way for so long because of the .com bubble. And when you took those risks and you did, invested in pets123.com, then they lost a whole lot of money, and it hasn't recovered in that sense. And yeah, there's a lot of risk aversion that's masked here. I think you really nailed it in that.
Well, I want to kind of go back to the podcast and everything that you've
sorry,
taken.
I kind of derailed it with my my view on San Francisco. I'm sorry.
No, it's fascinating because everyone puts
by
it
the
on
way,
a pedestal.
It's a beautiful city. Like, I love, like, the weather is great, especially outside the city. There's just, yeah.
I think people need to know what they're getting into if they're going out there. And sometimes you get caught up in all the maybe craziness. I don't know how you want to term it, but it is a wild world. I guess I got to go out there to really experience it so I know what I'm talking about. But I'm living vicariously through the podcast. And I guess at this point, 300 episodes plus, like, I want to break down why are you doing like daily episodes? Why are you so crazy involved in this? Because few people can commit to something to the degree you have, Matt.
And you were doing it while having that full-time job, right? With Prenda.
Yeah, I just love startups. I love startups so much, and I don't just love startups. I realize that I have a knack and a skill for various reasons to actually find startups really early. And that's the theme of the podcast, right? The podcast isn't let me interview a bunch of startups. It's let me interview startups before you've heard of them, and then they then are successful, and then you're like, oh, like we know about them from the podcast. So in some ways, the podcast will eventually lead to my entry into venture capital, whether like I get a job or whether I start a fund. I don't care. I do care. I would like to start my own thing, but that's kind of in the future. But it's like it's a way to prove three things. It's one, I just love talking to founders all the time. Like if I could do that all the time, I would. Second, it's the venture capital side. It's like, here's actually there's like this dynamic of, everyone he interviews, they could potentially be big. Some of them may not, some of them may be big, almost like a VC, but I'm not writing checks, right? It's just a podcast. Then the last thing, and this goes back to the previous point, which we don't have to talk more about, but I just want to show that to these VCs, like I can find this random guy in Phoenix, Arizona can get access to these deals before you. And I just want them to know that.
That's really
keep them
cool.
on their toes. I mean, because Twitter's one hack, is it Product Hunt? I never got into that world, but I recently discovered. I guess you can look into...
I think that's how you found our friend Valentin Perez, who founded Monthly. I listened to that. It might have been a year ago now or 9 months ago. But do you find a lot of your founders on Product Hunt?
Product Hunt is one of the sources I look at, yeah.
Yeah, it is cool to see. You normally don't get this picture. That's what Henry and I are doing. We're starting this podcast. When Henry's got his idea, we're kind of growing Smart Nonsense in the background just to do it from day one. Really, everyone gets to see everything because light isn't shed on that world very often. So that's why I love what you're doing.
One thing to mention is this will be included in like a future book I write or something. But the first 3 years of my startup journey, I actually chronicled in a that no one knows this, at least from the current world. 100 words a day. I blogged for 100 words a day every day for not every day, but like for 2 or 3 years from 2015 to 2017, I blogged almost every day, 100 words a day. And there is some that you want to talk
You
about
gotta
evolution.
publish that, yeah.
Like that'll be once I found, like, I don't think I'm successful. I'm like on my way, but that'll be like once I find some success, I'll publish that, and they'll see how raw AF I was, because man, I was raw.
And that's the problem, is we fetishize like the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, the Sheryl Sandbergs, and nobody sees like that grind from the inside unless it's immediate friends and family. I think that's what Dylan set out to do here, and me in video format.
Yeah, it's interesting because you never get, like, you hear about, a lot of people say fetishize the failure and stuff like that, or just the trials and tribulations. But now we're literally inside your head, 100 words a day in theory. Whenever this book comes out, we'll be sure to have you on.
Even
whenever
still,
you're
they're only fetishizing the failures once that person is wildly successful and can talk about those failures. It's never in the moment.
Right. What's so Matt, right now, if you had your little mock fund to play with, is there anyone recently that really got you excited that you're like, I would double down on their company?
Oh, there's like yeah, there is. So
there's about 300 of them actually.
let me off the top of my head. So absolutely could do. I actually I think they're gonna. I can't. Never mind. So there might be Kadu. So Kadu is an app where you they link to Strava, so they can see your fitness data, and you're able to compete with other people on fitness challenges, and there's actually money involved. And the reason why this is super interesting is three reasons. First of all, there's been a lot of apps that have tried this and have got initial adoption, then failed because of user churn. The churn was not because they got on for a reason. It was just too friction to add your information, versus this is links to Strava. So that's the first reason. Second reason is the CEO and the founding team are just super cool, and not just cool, but like badasses and super smart, like really knows how to run a company, or at least is learning. He's a young guy, but he stands out. And then lastly, I just love the product. I've used it. So there's that. Another one that these people are not fundraising, but when they are, maybe I'll be wealthy and I can invest, or I won't because everyone else wants to invest. But Gather is one of these like spatial 2D maps that kind of combine Zoom and Mario Party. And it is just bloody fascinating. The team, is brilliant.
Is that how you were playing Pong with your Zoom members? Okay.
Yep. And then let me see. I mean, I could honestly just look at my podcast RSS feed. Those are the two that come to mind right now. I mean, there's also hold on. Let me. Those are two. How many? I can give you probably like way more. I'm curious, but I don't want to like just spurt out like for 10 minutes because I could if I wanted to.
I'd be curious your your starting 5 lineup or something like that, but I don't want to put too much pressure on you to pick whenever.
But this is why I do the podcast. I love, like, if someone's like, yo, I just started this project doing X, Y, and Z, I would invite them onto the podcast. And after the podcast, I might be like, great, this is cool. But in my head, being like, I would never invest. Or this someone I was talking to yesterday. It was like an hour.
This is like when I tweeted at you.
And what was this?
It's like, you're like, yeah, this is okay. Never invest.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. There needs to be more transparency in this market. And the thing is, I don't think I said I would never. I think I said keep me updated.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, because I do value progress. But you're right. That is funny. But there's some people that they can be so early. They just have it. There's the right market, the right team, right, whatever. And I just have a feeling. I'm like, great. If I want to phantom invest, and I don't have a vehicle for me to do this right now. But
what is
I do.
Sorry to jump in. In terms of
fine.
Trends, is it usually what gets you most excited about a company? Is it the team? Is it the idea? What gets you really motivated?
So it starts with market. Market's how I filter, because there are so many talented people working on trillions of industry, dozens of industries.
Trillions to dozens.
Yeah, no. So dozens of industries. And some of these, and I won't be able to talk to all of them, right? So my initial filter for who I reach out to is market first. So like if you're building in a market that's interesting, then I check out your site. And then if the site is different from other things I've seen on the market, it doesn't have to be better. If it's just different, then I invite you. Like it's
That's
that
what you
like I
did.
don't.
You asked me for my URL. You asked me for a non-existent URL.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, so when you have a URL, you're closer forward.
Yeah. The first step. Belky didn't even make the first threshold.
So that and then so pretty much if they're in an interesting market doing something different, I'll usually invite them on. That's one of a few kind of frameworks that I use for how I invite people on.
Can I ask you then, Matt? I was just watching a TED Talk, and it was about the most significant signifier. That's too many signy words. Of a company's success. It wasn't team, it wasn't fundraising, it wasn't work ethic or luck. It was timing. That was the biggest indicator of success. Yeah. I think that might play into the market thing you're kind of talking about.
It's the same thing. Timing and market, 100%. Like, yes. I've adopted this very much so. And I thought I didn't fully understand this as a founder, but now I understand it. I understand it well. Like forward thinking city, like, you know, if I was to raise capital, like the timing's like we all just went online and no one knows what to do with themselves, right? So I think timing and market are synonymous.
That's interesting. Now that I think about it, I feel like so many founders in those interviews when they're incredibly successful, so many of them say, you know, I was in the right time, right place. Maybe it was the .com bubble. Maybe it's this crypto bubble, whatever it is. So many of them say right time, right place. It's just about acting on it.
What other lessons have come from so many episodes of just talking to founders?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, because this is our 52nd or so.
Yeah, we did like
episode,
a 50th episode. These are all the lessons we learned from the podcast.
You're 250 ahead. You're a veteran.
Do you jot down or I guess maybe it's all mental, like what you've learned over the years or a year?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm totally honest. Going to come up with this on the spot. I'm just gonna think through and then just kind of share what comes up. I mean, but definitely the first thing is that and this is not unique. This is you've both probably heard this, but I think it's worth saying again. Like the people, like the people that I talk to, maybe the more prolific people, like Austin Allred or Eric Ries or Raymond Kuhn. Like I firmly believe that no individual person is actually that smart. It's just what assets you build, and then the surface area, the luck surface area that you create for yourself.
Well, you just had a post on this too, right? With building an asset.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So that is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. Like things are not as hard as people think. But then at the same time, some make them harder if they raise $5 million out of the gate. Yeah, you just made it harder on yourself. Congratulations. But I just think so. There's that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I don't know if it's just I don't know if I was like this before the podcast, but I just am really now good at my bullshit meter is just really great, and I'm able to not for the guests. The guests are pretty much always fantastic, but because I get to hear what high quality founders think about things all the time, I then can pattern match when something doesn't match, right? And I think that one of the lessons I've learned from the podcast is I get so many different perspectives from these early stage founders. I almost in some ways gives me more of a jump on the market than investors or something like that. So there's that. Then I would say the last thing is that analytics, I don't know what your guys' views are at. You don't have to share, but mine are lower than everyone thinks. They're not small. I got a lot of subscribers and a lot of views, but for 300 episodes, people sometimes oh, are you at 1 million? Are you this? I'm just I'm not going to tell you, but it's not as high as you think. And that's okay because I don't do it for the views. I do it for the conversation. So the last thing I would say is the last thing I would say is punt the analytics, right? Screw the analytics. Just focus on the conversations. And the one product I want to build one day is a personal CRM that doubles as a podcast player where there's no analytics. It's just a way to keep up with your previous guests. I think that'd be an awesome idea. I would build it, if I get to that point.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking you have such a network out there. It's almost overwhelming, all these people floating in the world, but it's fantastic when you do have the money or you do want to reach out. You already talked to them for 30 minutes.
And you say, your conversations with them are so much more casual and different than the information VCs are getting when they pitch with these people. And I think what you're doing with these guests is way more valuable. Kind of like you said, is you're actually ahead of a lot of VCs in that respect.
There will be a time, I don't know if it's forward thinking or a separate startup. It'll be all similar, but like at some point I will probably go big with something, and it is a product that eliminates that devalues the warm intro and it replaces it with something else. And it's now everyone talks about it like, oh, that's like, cute, whatever. But I think it's actually possible. And I'm gonna need some help, right? I'm gonna need like cavalry. And one of the reasons that I do all these podcasts is not like I expect them all to help me, but like I got the deck stacked against me, right? Like I am not born in anything. I'm born in Phoenix. I'm raised in Phoenix. Like I have a network, but I didn't do YC or this or that or this. So I want to kind of, when I do embark on this, could be in 2 months, could be in 2 years, like who knows? But I want to give myself the biggest advantage I possibly can, because like I'm pretty much going to try to change a culture of a city. And like that you don't and I'm talking about San Francisco. So you need help. And I'm just kind of like, this is the cavalry, even if they don't help, just like being on the podcast and me knowing them and them knowing me, like I love that,
Matt, that is very wise, and we'll let you run. Again, I feel like when people come on, we only scratch the surface of all the things we can talk about.
That's why we're like, oh, we'll see. Maybe Matt will be okay with, an hour and a half or 2 hours. But I know you're busy. You got stuff to do. You got a podcast shooting every single day, in addition to your city to run. So, Mr. Mayor, we'll let you go. But anything you want to mention, we'll do it in the intro. But any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for parting thoughts, I think that for anyone listening, things are a lot more attainable than you think. And I think on top of that, great. Here we go. This is what I want to finish it with. People think that they have to be like great from day one to build something great. But in reality, all great is good every day. If you're good consistently, you will be great. And that's what I've learned after 300 podcast episodes. Like one episode does not make it great. What makes it great is I've done 300 of them. And it's been every day. So, good equals great consistently.
Cool.
Good equals good equals
great equals good consistently.
Great equals good consistently. That's right.
I love that. I might have to get that tattooed on my inner arm, like Henry has a tattoo to remind him there. This is awesome, Matt. Thanks again for jumping on. We'll touch base again, maybe at 500 whenever the book comes out. We'll get you on. But it's been awesome talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good. It was nice chatting with you guys.
Thanks, Matt.